north of 60. I'm Heidi Schweighofer. Today we're going to talk about sleep. I think I stopped sleeping through the night when my daughter was born, and 31 years later I'm still not sleeping through the night. So we're going to talk about what I can do and what you can do if you're experiencing some sleep issues. My guest today is Dr. Lawrence Saltus. Dr. Saltus is board certified in neurology, electroneurodiagnosis, and sleep disorders. He received his MD at Ohio State University, and he's on the board at Western Reserve Hospital. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
I'm glad I got the electroneurodiagnosis.
That's a tricky word. It can get worse, too.
Dr. Saltus, you know, I've noticed, as I said, with me, with friends of mine, all over the age of 60, that our sleep has changed. And if we don't fall asleep, we wake up at 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Talk about what happens with sleep as we age.
Well, I guess like everything else that happens to us over the years, there are certain parts of our body that mature, and that maturation can lead to some changes in computer function in the brain, muscle tone in the throat, changes in our body habitus that contribute to that form of difficulty, or various forms of difficulty, because sleep disorders are very common. Over the years, certain things also influence what happens to us. Certainly, our behaviors, medications we have to take, certain things we do later on at night to agitate ourselves, watching television or other entertainment, the variation of the times we go to bed, the times that we get up, the lack of or dedication to enough sleep at night, all of those things are contributing factors. But certainly, they're very, very common. I've experienced this myself. When you think about, we have talk and sleep disorders meetings about the prototype sleep is seen in a young teenage boy, goes to bed, puts in 8 or 9 hours and gets up refreshed. During that time, when you're a young person, you have transitions that happen from wakefulness and various stages of sleep. Sleep being a very specific progression of different kinds of physiological and electrical changes in the brain, neurochemical changes in the brain, which have a very nice way of happening when one is young. But like I said, the influences of life, possible diseases, certain habits, some of them constructive, maybe some of them not so constructive, can contribute to those changes. And they can be very, very difficult to deal with at times. I'm like you, I seem to not go to sleep as well as I used to.
Yeah.
And I wake up in the night wondering what woke me up.
Yes.
And those are just things that happen because I'm doing things like occasionally having coffee too late. I'm staying up being tortured by the Browns, like I'm going to do tonight, and getting agitated.
You and my husband.
I know. Those sort of things all contribute to this change we undergo. There are other specific things that happen during our life. As we put on a little bit of extra weight, we can develop things with our breathing, where we obstruct air getting into our lungs, the prototype of sleep apnea.
Yep, we're going to get to that.
And then things like restless legs.
We're going to get to that
and
too.
Periodical movement disorders, and some other interesting things that go bump in the night called the parasomnias. So all of those things can happen, and they may not be present until we get to be 25, 30, 35, 40, 55, 60 years old.
Does our internal clock change? Do we need less sleep than that teenage boy? Do we need more? Do we need the same amount? But something to be simplified, I know in the question I'm asking, but is there something happening internally clockwise too. Does that make sense?
Yes, the internal clock and the internal mechanism is probably functioning like a computer that gets a little bit too old and needs to be rebooted at times and is not rebooted properly.
Good analogy.
It's the way I try to think about it. And there are those kind of things that we need to do, like go to bed at the appropriate time, get our sleep, and wake up to the morning light and get bright light in our eyes to wake us up. Those sort of things happen less and less in this day and age. And another typical example would be during the winter, as our exposure to the sun, which is an important thing that we call a Zeitgeber. It turns on our internal wake-up clock. If we're wearing sunglasses, got the shades down because you don't want to get up in the morning because of the bright light, all those sort of things can contribute to a poor night's sleep. That is, if you don't wake up enough and don't get enough daylight, that internal clock does not pick up as well as it used to.
So you're saying literally being exposed to sun or outside or sunlight coming in your house, not lamps and artificial lights, so it's more of a natural light that affects us.
Natural light, which can be mimicked by the new LED lights, is probably the best kind of light to have. It's got a lot of blue-green spectrum in it, and that's the alerting light. The really nice mushroom light things that give you a nice tone during the house, and they're very, I can't remember the term they call that kind of shade.
We have some Edison lights that are sort of a dim amber glow. They're beautiful.
They're beautiful, but they are not the light you need in your eyes right off the bat in the morning. That is, if you're expecting to have a normal workday.
Yeah.
There are people who are born with a tendency to spend more of their time awake at night. They can have various disease-like situations, I should say. There are variations in genetics. We know the night crowd, there's a day crowd, and there are differences in how their internal clocks turn on. And there is no doubt that some people are very comfortable at night being awake. Third shift people who just say, I feel better then, and they are those kind of people. The normal situation is that a young man or young woman usually wants to get up late, hence the high schoolers you see walking like
zombies at
going
7
ahead,
a.m.
zombie walking and zombie arriving at school if it's early. They really need to sleep later because, number one, they need more sleep because they're not going to bed early enough, and they are have this delayed sleep phase where they want to go to bed later, hence the 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning thing that's very common in young people. And as we get to be younger and younger and younger, like us, it seems there's a tendency to want to go to bed or fall asleep earlier and earlier, and that's a perturbation of that circadian rhythm for sleep that can precipitate things like transient naps in front of the TV, which really messes up sleep at night.
Yeah.
So.
Oh my gosh.
So it's the idea is to keep the lights bright if you have trouble staying awake. Turn down the lights and even if you have trouble going to sleep. But by all means, the late day and the early evening naps can be a killer for your normal sleep.
Talk about snoring. My husband is a snorer. He now wears one of those. I'm sure he loves to know that the whole city of Hudson now knows that he wears a Breathe Right.
Breathe Right strips?
The Breathe Right strips.
Do they work for him?
They work for him. He does some odd sounds, but generally the big sound, the big snoring is gone. What causes that, and how is that related to sleep apnea?
Snoring is essentially a vibration of the airway, and it can be due to one's basic structure. That is, the airway is narrow and like, let's see, like the water on the Columbia River going through the Narrows gets really wild, and the rapids, and shakes the walls even. That sort of thing can happen. That it can be a secondary phenomenon, though, to abnormal turbinate structure in your nose. The palate can be redundant. The airway can be narrow or thin. Some people who have the really nice jaw lines have nice big airways. Other people who have the retracted, I guess you'd call it a minimal failure of the lower half of the face developing, have very narrow airways. One can have a big tongue, curiosity, but there can be some scary big tongues when you never expect it that can flop back in the airway.
Oh my God.
I've seen some of those. They are frightening at times.
I bet.
Yeah, but those kind of things happen. And then on top of it all, if one gains excess weight, there are several areas in the body where you deposit extra lipid and fat material, and around the airway is one of them. And all this can compress the airway. If you're carrying a huge load of weight on your abdomen and you sleep in the reclining position or supine position, that has to be moved.
Sure.
And so there's a struggle.
Yeah.
And those kind of things, those latter group of things can lead to what we call sleep apnea.
My mother, many, many years ago, was diagnosed with sleep apnea because of the sounds of her snoring and breathing at night, and my dad thought she was stopping, not breathing at all.
Actually
and
stopping breathing, right?
Then she had a CPAP machine with a mask, and it was so cumbersome for her that she, finally, after about a year, just didn't keep wearing it. Is it like it was in the old days? Do you give those machines out to people to use at night, and are they able to use them effectively?
I would say probably sleep apnea is the most common significant sleep disorder I deal with. And yes, we do prescribe CPAP machines. There's various modalities: continuous positive airway pressure, there's bi-level positive airway pressure, and there's also machines that support breathing when people have this curiosity of central sleep apnea where they just stop breathing at night. So the machine can actually kick in breaths.
Again, that's what hers did, I
Yes, and some of them can be cumbersome. The old style masks were sometimes uncomfortable at best, but now there are various different kinds of masks, including custom fit masks, ones that include airway mouthpieces to try to keep the mouth shut.
Oh.
Or we use things like chin straps, which I think is a little bit cumbersome. But usually, I would say we can probably get 90% of people accommodated anymore. And then there's always accommodation levels of preparation in the sleep laboratory that can be done also. Because we really want to get people to use the therapy, because there is no doubt that untreated sleep apnea, depending on the severity, can lead to cardiac problems, premature stroke, et cetera, et cetera.
The definition of sleep apnea is without breath during sleep, or?
Essentially, cessation of breathing is the category of sleep apnea. There is obstructive sleep apnea where the airway actually collapses due to the vacuum one creates in trying to inhale. So, because the airway can be very, we call it floppy, have very little tone at times, and it certainly loses more tone during REM sleep, which is a paralytic time of sleep for most skeletal muscle. Central sleep apnea, Undine's curse in mythology, is essentially a problem where, due to inappropriate insensitivity to changes in oxygen and carbon dioxide tension in the body, one just stops breathing at night. And so, of course, we don't want that to happen, certainly to any great extent. So we have the machines, like I said, that will provide that kick to breath and insufflate the lungs.
So if a spouse is hearing their spouse breathing with snoring and then stopping and then the gasping, they really need to come in and get diagnosed with what's going on and find out
Absolutely.
how to treat their sleep apnea.
Absolutely. People who are gasping at night can cause themselves a lot of problems, like I've mentioned, and you can get things like gastroesophageal reflux disorder, GERD.
Uh-huh.
A lot of people who feel they have that take a lot of antacids, but the thing to do is to think of sleep apnea one due to the common connection in the throat of the airway and the
my
esophagus. You inhale, but air doesn't go down, so things come up out of your stomach to spend some time in your esophagus or throat. So, and certainly the gasping, which essentially reflects a wake up. Your body says, I gotta breathe here.
Yeah.
And
That's
so you gotta wake up.
That was my mother.
Yes.
It was an audible gasp. And then,
Oh yes. Or choke at night. We commonly ask those questions.
oh gosh, I have so many questions. All right, let's go to this one. I have a nurse colleague that I worked with for many years. She's older than I am. She's in her early 80s. And I talked to her last week, and she was just diagnosed with beginning stages of Alzheimer's, very sadly. She said to me that her doctor told her that one of the factors was her bizarre sleep schedule. This woman is a very type A, or was.
Sure.
She was a consultant and went all over the United States, so her time zones were screwed up, quite a bit. And he said that the years of that, maybe 50 years of it, because she started doing these things when she was in her 30s, probably at least helped the beginnings of Alzheimer's or dementia. Have you heard about that link? Is that a true correlation?
These things are just now being reflected upon in research and based on some of the newer discoveries in Alzheimer's disease and sleep and its relationship to the possible precipitating factors of Alzheimer's disease. There is no doubt, during the activity of the day, we generate a variety of different electrical effects on the brain as well as chemical effects. Sleep is required to reverse some of those accumulations of inappropriate electrical activity or chemicals in the brain. It's been shown that during the day we generate certain things like derivatives of amyloid for our brain. And it turns out that during mostly slow wave sleep, we clear that amyloid as long as it's good, constructive, nice slow wave sleep.
No kidding.
Yes, and that's that and many other things happen during sleep, the regeneration of certain other chemicals in the brain that one needs to have during the course of the day. If you're not getting good sleep and maybe substituting for sleep some sedation and things like that, there are certain sedatives certainly that do that too.
Yeah, I want to get to that. I'm so afraid I won't get all my questions answered. All right, let's go right to treatment, okay? And self-treatment first. So I'm going to name them all and you talk about them. Some people take melatonin. That doesn't work worth diddly for me. Some people take ZzzQuil and a Tylenol PM and all of those that are anticholinergics, and I've heard about those linked with Alzheimer's. Some people drink alcohol into the evening thinking that's going to make them go to sleep. Some people take CBD oil or that CBD stuff. I don't do that either, but that supposedly helps. those are the things that I hear about as self-treatments.
Yes, and I don't really prescribe many of them myself, to be honest with you. Certainly, melatonin at an appropriate dose of 3 milligrams given at the time you want to go to sleep every night over maybe months and months or even years can help contribute to the normal circadian rhythm of sleep.
Oh,
So that can help. Melatonin is actually excellent for migraine too, so I give a lot of that out for migraine, and it seems to help sleep in some people at the same time.
so 3 milligrams at the time you want to go to bed,
Yeah.
okay?
Now, things like antihistamines, there's a big rage now about the anticholinergics and how they may be depleting neurochemicals that not only are important in sleep, but important in normal function of neuronal communication can be affected by those drugs. So I shy away and tell people to shy away from those in general, because there's so many of them are used for from the time you're little for colds, flu, and things like that. And it may be overstated now because this is all relatively just been brought up, and certainly the bigger studies to actually tell us how influential that is have to be done. There may be, there are certainly people who have genetic predisposition to things like Alzheimer's, that they could be more easily aggravated by certain things like the anticholinergics than others. But in general, I sort of like to avoid them. I don't like to take them even myself now. What little brain I have left I want to preserve. Probably one of the more dangerous and negative things to do is to drink alcohol for sleep. Alcohol is a nice sedative for about 2 or 3 hours, then you wake up.
Yeah.
The sedation breaks off, and then when you are asleep, it makes obstructive sleep apnea syndrome worse. It reduces a good slow wave sleep, so the regenerative part of sleep, that is the slow wave sleep, is affected. And you have more REM, maybe, but it's at a price.
What about, are you familiar with CBDs and all of those
Yeah,
new things on the market?
Yeah,
I tried an oil, which was awful, and it didn't do a thing for me either. So
is that oil you took by your mouth?
you put it under your tongue, and then
yeah.
you supposedly drift off into sleep, and it was the most awful tasting stuff. And I know people swear by CBDs, but I'm not one of them.
We would wish that CBD and other forms of marijuana and its derivatives and those sort of things would do something like that. But I don't think that's going to be very much in the therapeutic armamentarium for sleep. There are some people who smoke marijuana. It's an anxiolytic for them. So they do that at the price of their lungs, because smoking marijuana is worse than smoking cigarettes for
right.
your lungs, and eventually you're going to aggravate that problem. But I tell people, say, well, if you want to do that, that's fine. Just stay away from the alcohol and take this stuff that I'm going to give you, because I think this will work too.
So what do you prescribe then? And I'm going to get in another question here before our time is up, which it almost is, believe it or not.
Okay.
I know. What do you suggest? I come to you, doctor, I can't sleep. Tell me, and I don't have sleep apnea. Tell me what I should do.
Well, I think the first commitment you should make is to your own sleep hygiene. That is, people who have difficulty sleeping should adopt a very regular schedule. They should try to set aside 7 hours of sleep if they're having trouble staying asleep or going to sleep at night, and go to bed at the same time, but for sure get up at the same time every day, no matter what. Even if you've been up till 2 o'clock with some family situation or to watch a ball game or something like that, if you have trouble sleeping, you should get up at the same time.
Okay.
Minimal naps during the day. Certainly a power nap but 15 minutes is okay. But if you have trouble sleeping at night, you should set an alarm to get you up, because if you go into certain stages of sleep, you'll cause problems for your sleep that night.
Okay. What about coffee? Should I stop at noon? I usually do. I don't drink coffee in the afternoon.
Well, I think if you have difficulty sleeping, caffeine can be a problem. Usually caffeine is dissipated in 4 minutes, but it also has a euphoric effect itself. And caffeine's a wonderful thing. There's no doubt about it. It contributed to the evolution of Western civilization when coffee went to Europe, because they weren't drinking as much alcohol.
Oh.
It was,
I never knew that.
Yeah, it's a very interesting history of caffeine, but you can be a very slow metabolizer or a fast metabolizer. Until the last 5 years, I've been able to drink 2 big cups of coffee and then go to bed at night. Now I can't do that.
No.
We've actually just discussed a shift to decaffeinated coffee. So the sensitivity, your individual sensitivity, and perhaps some personal behavioral dependence on it can be involved. But if you're having trouble sleeping, I would say drinking coffee after 5 o'clock, you're probably asking for trouble.
Okay. Can I have a glass of wine with dinner, but then nothing after that? Of course, well, I don't drink a lot of martinis or anything anyway. So, I mean, should one also stop their alcohol intake at a certain time?
Well, I think late alcohol is a problem.
Okay.
Alcohol after dinner, if you have trouble sleeping at night, is a no-no.
No, okay. Oh, I wanted to talk about restless leg syndrome. I wanted to talk about a lot of other things. You might have to come back in the future, which I would love. Give me 2 takeaways, because we have 3 minutes.
Okay. Number one of the biggest problems with Americans is not dedicating enough time in bed at night. There are lots of people think they can go on 4 hours, 5 hours. One can't. You always build up a sleep debt that will reduce your efficiency doing the things you need to do during the day if you persist in that behavior. And I think if you recognize some of the things that you've mentioned also, choking, sputtering at night, excessive daytime sleepiness, abnormal movements at night,
That's
or
my husband.
restless legs, those sort of things, go to a sleep professional. There are sleep specialists that are in various disciplines, pulmonary medicine, ENT, psychiatry, and neurology, that can deal with some of those things a little bit differently than others. But for the most part, everybody can get you to the right place for the right therapy.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. This subject
pleasure.
matter
Nice
is
to be here.
fascinating.
I thought your questions were really, really good.
Well, that's
I
a
think
good
that-
thing. Thank you for watching North of 60. If you want any information about Dr. Saltis and how to reach him at his office at Western Reserve Hospital,
That's correct.
We will have that information for you after the show ends. Thank you so much. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
My pleasure.